let me just start by introducing Scott Carson. Scott has been pivotal in the dermatology and aesthetic medicine community, but prior to that, really worked in large scale, different marketplaces, commerce, e-commerce, and I think looks at our industry as this as a piece of commerce, and looks at the greater scale of what's happening in business and in getting products to consumers, and has applied that to this business of aesthetics. So it's really interesting to always get Scott's perspective. He started MRP, which is really a platform for similar to business of aesthetics, transparent communication, reviews of equipment, sharing of information, access to information, access to training, repairs, equipment, really all the pieces of things. So that was my introduction to Scott. And Scott, I welcome you here tonight. I know you're going to bring so much energy to what we're doing.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having us.
And then Dale, Dr. Dale Coop, actually introduced Scott and I. Dr. Coop and I have worked together at a number of different companies together. Dr. Coop has been CEO of, you name some of the greatest laser companies, Cyton, DECA, and beyond. Also owns a huge amount of laser patents, designed some of the early fractional CO2 with Sharplin, I believe, that became Luminous, and a Caltech grad. I always love to say a nerd's nerd, and certainly can get my little Tourette's tics going in 30 seconds to a minute or so if he wants to. But Dr. Dale Coop. So I love Dale. And Scott, if I haven't got to meet Dr. Nyson, I know you invited him on. I know you're down in Southern California, and we love that you're participating in this. So thank you for joining us. But Scott, I'll let you do some more.
Yeah, so I've asked a couple of clinicians to be on just to bring some balance to the discussion, both as early buyers and potentially sellers of devices. One is Dr. Mata, who's not on yet. Hopefully she'll get on. She was having some difficulties a few minutes ago. But another one is Chris Tomasian. Many of you may know Chris. He's one of the most prolific social media influencers in the world today in aesthetics. He's a dermatologist in Southern California, board certified dermatologist. He's a very young dermatologist. He went to college and medical school at the same time, and brings an incredibly new perspective to communicating and educating the kind of aesthetics community. And you'll find him on TikTok and Insta, many other platforms, Yahoo or YouTube, where he's communicating and sharing his experiences. And I think you'll find him incredibly fun and fascinating. So Chris, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me. You always make me sound much better than I am, but I appreciate it.
Well, I'll tone that down.
So I want to start with this. I can't remember the words. I should have pulled it up, but I posted something in our Facebook group, which is now 5,000 strong, and people are really active in it. And I love the sharing of information that's happening. But it was something along the lines of, who has a piece of equipment sitting around that you want to get rid of? It was a basic question. And I actually emailed Scott the next day because I was surprised there were like 25 responses within a day of people that had stuff sitting around. And I'm nudging Scott because they're partners with what we're doing. We want them to engage with our customers in full transparency. And I'm saying these are some opportunities. Well, I go back 2 days later. Now there's 125 comments. I mean, everyone has equipment. So and myself included. I mean, I was sitting there today saying, maybe this will be the fire under my ass that I need to finally deal with it, sitting on this panel myself. But Scott, I mean, how much equipment is really out there? There's got to be tons and tons of it.
It's surprising to me still today, even before COVID, which I'll speak to more specifically, how much equipment is out there. And I think you have to look at the kind of social and dynamics that exist in the sale of capital medical equipment, especially in aesthetics. If you think about, this is one of the remaining industries where everything is still sold by the rep with the very best equipment that comes to your office. It's very rare to find any capital market anymore where sales reps are deployed into people's homes or businesses to sell things. So it's a very aggressive sales cycle. There's a lot of pressure put on clinicians. There's a lot of pressure they put on themselves to want to have the very best or the newest or most trendy devices. And so there's massive spending. And most of the time, it's unjustified or unwarranted. It's not necessary. And often we talk about light being light, meaning that there hasn't been a lot of changes in, the actual, the photons over the last 20, 30 years of this industry. You can speed them up a little bit in the way you deliver them, and you can pulse them a little bit differently, but fundamentally light is light. And so a lot of this purchasing has been, is probably significantly overdone. But with COVID, what was really remarkable is with all of this PPP that was deployed into the industry, where the industry, unlike restaurants and other businesses that really suffered, our industry exploded. And they had, these clinicians and practitioners and administrators had to deploy those dollars into something other than rent and payroll, which they were able to cover by their normal operations, while people really wanted to focus on themselves and less travel and other things they normally would have spent money on. And this has put a massive amount of inventory into the channel, like nothing I've ever seen. We're getting no less than, and I'm not embellishing, 50 to 100 phone calls a day of people selling assets, many of them not used. So I think we're entering a specific time over the next 4 to 5 years with massive amounts of inventory available to be redeployed.
I want to just move on that thought for a second, which is there's tons of this equipment that's out there now, and you made the comment unused. And so one of the things as a physician or as a seller of equipment is, when's the appropriate time for me to move on from equipment? Unused seems like the obvious. If it's not being used at all and it's sitting there, it's time to move on. But there may be some pieces of equipment, maybe I use them infrequently and they don't have that much value, but they still bring some value in terms of revenue to the practice. At what point do I move on from technology? And I'll open that to all of you and to please respond.
Well, Dale or Chris, but Dale, you want to comment, or maybe I'll just say this.
Yeah, I think
Go ahead.
I would say when you have negative cash flow from that piece of equipment, I think it's time to try to dispose of it or find somebody else who needs it. The main goal is to make money with the equipment, and if you're not, then it's probably not something you need in your office.
What do you quantify as negative cash flow? Negative meaning it's taking up space and not producing any revenue.
It's taking up space. It's costing you more to promote the product than you're getting in revenue from the product. Maybe the consumables are too high, maybe very low patient demand. And if it's paid for and it's sitting in your office and you have procedures once in a while, it's probably okay. But if you're making payments on it and you can't pay for the payments with the revenue generated from the device, then it was, you probably were misinformed by the sales rep who told you we're going to make a lot of money, and it's probably time to move on or find somebody else who needs it.
Yeah, I think, Dale, what you're getting at is even a lot harder than what I was getting after, which is admitting maybe that we made a poor decision with a piece of equipment, and that's really a challenge, right? Chris?
I would agree. I mean, I think a lot of times we buy these the equipment, these lasers, these devices, because the salesman comes in, gives you a sheet, says, oh, look at all this demand for this laser. And then you get really excited about this. So you're like, okay, I'll buy this expensive machine. You get in your office and then you realize maybe there's 5 or 6 other providers with that same laser in your area. So now you're promoting and spending all this money on promotion. And sometimes I've had it where I've gotten a device and I'm like, I actually don't even like I don't enjoy doing that procedure anymore. Right. So there is an aspect of we want to do these procedures. Right. And at that point, I'm like, it's maybe giving me a little bit of money, but I could probably spend that same amount of time on a different device and really go in 100% with that. And I think that's a good time to maybe give it up and maybe invest into a different device.
Yeah, I mean, Scott, I want to give you, so I apologize before for our technical difficulties. We didn't get our stuff out. So I want to give you a chance to introduce our newest panelist that's able to.
Looks like Dr. Mata, you were able to get in. Thank you for joining. But we can't hear you.
Well, why don't you do just a brief introduction while she's getting her speaker going.
I'll let her get voice and I'll introduce her in a second.
Okay.
If there, but Dr. Mata is recently bought a piece of equipment. She's got a large and successful practice in California as well. And but I'll let her figure out the voice. But let me answer something, and I want to give somebody. And Chris, I think you touched on this a little bit, but I'm going to kind of make it really clear. And I think Dale, you touched on it kind of indirectly as well. With capital medical equipment, these are tools. There's a tendency for this industry to become very emotional about those tools. And Chris, that's what you touched on. And I think the first thing you have to do is become non-emotional about the equipment. Non-emotional. That is the most important thing, is your first step. There's a tendency for clinicians, they made a bad decision. They were bullied. They went to a seminar. They were misled. And there's this fear or embarrassment or just the risk of losing, money, because you don't lose the money until you sell it. It still has that pent up value, Jeff. If you paid $100,000, you haven't sold it yet, it's still worth $100,000. But you really have to become non-emotional about the transaction. And that's the first step. And then the second thing is, from a legal standpoint, if you've leased the asset through a traditional leasing company, the likelihood you can sell that is almost zero. Because on a lease, you're technically renting it. And a fair amount of this equipment is under these lease agreements, and they're non-cancelable and you cannot pay them off. So I think that the first thing is become non-emotional. The second thing is to look at your ownership and see, in fact, if you do own it. And then from there, I'll let everybody else kind of comment if they like, and then I'll kind of talk about what Dale touched on, what are some of the considerations you need to consider or think about before you pull the trigger. There you are. We got you.
I think I'm
There you are.
on.
Yes,
I'm
Dr.
so
Mata,
sorry.
welcome.
Thank you. I apologize for this technical issues.
No worry, you're on now. So Jeff, far away.
Well, just to bring you up to speed, the question that we were on was, when is an appropriate time to give up technology? And I was thinking about it purely from a revenue standpoint. And then Dr. Koop came in and brought up this idea of, and I think a lot of times it's pride that stands in the way of knowing when, our gut says to get rid of equipment because we're not passionate about it anymore. We don't think that the results are as consistent as we wanted. We don't generate the revenue that we wanted. But I was thinking about it a little more optimistically, although Dale, you're probably dead on most of the time. Hey, I had my run with this equipment. It was free 4 years. What's new in the marketplace? This thing's just kind of sitting around now. I have other things that have replaced it. But anyway, just to get your thoughts on transitioning equipment.
Yeah. I think when you're not servicing your clients anymore, when you're not servicing your patients with this equipment anymore, it's time to consider something new. And yeah, when you're not passionate about it anymore, you can't really sell it. You really have to believe in what you're doing. And so I think really those are the two things I would consider for myself is, is this generating any revenue for me anymore? Is it, consuming time without profit? And is it really doing what it needs to do? Is it cutting edge technology? And do I enjoy doing it?
Yeah, that's, both of you just show that you're in more advanced stage of your practice because you bring up enjoyment. And I think that some of that is a generational thing, and some of it is success now, success with our kind of the younger generations of
Mm-hmm.
practice really not only want to be generating revenue, they want to be happy. They want to be doing things that they enjoy. And I think, if you talk to Scott or Dale and maybe some of their friends, I'm not calling you out necessarily, but some of your friends, the work ethic and the decisions that they made are very different than what we see today. So I think it's just worth noting.
Mm-hmm.
So Scott, one of the things, and both of you physicians have sold and bought pre-owned equipment. So I think the first thing that everyone thinks is that my equipment has no value or has very little value. That's maybe why a lot of them aren't motivated to move anything. And on the other side of that, Scott, what you're seeing is equipment is that physicians think that these technologies have tons of value, residual value, and they come to you with astronomical prices that there's no way you could even retail sell for. So there's this huge schism.
Mm-hmm.
Look, I want to just give everybody some clarity on the pre-owned market. First, and I've talked about this before, if there wasn't pre-owned devices in the world today, specifically in the US, we could not afford healthcare. And I'm not talking about aesthetics. I'm talking about going to the hospital. It would not exist. If there was not pre-owned CAT scans being pulled out of facilities and sold into the global market, if there weren't into regional markets that couldn't afford new CAT scans or ultrasounds or rad rooms, if there wasn't the redeployment of these assets and the third-party service that exists, healthcare would not be affordable. It effectively would be a monopoly, and we couldn't afford it. So we have to recognize that the secondary market is extraordinary on a global basis. And very few people know this, but eBay last year did $1 billion in transactions of medical equipment, dental equipment, rad rooms, aesthetics, IV pumps, 97% of it used. And that is growing about 100 million a year. And you have to recognize that eBay is considered a practical and collectible marketplace. It's not considered a healthcare marketplace. So right now, clinicians, and I can count on one hand when devices have gone up in value, and it's mostly a momentary blink. An example would be last year when Allergan lost its FDA clearance on the Elite for a few months. The legacy systems went up in value for a little bit. I can count those events on one hand. Almost every device, I would say 99.9% of the time, they go down in value. So if you get to that place where you're no longer emotional about it, you no longer see return on investment, it's no longer a tool in the practice. If it was left behind, who knows what reason you got it. If it's broken, if it doesn't work correctly, there's a massive parts market out there. You can put things on eBay, on .net, on Bimimis, on Alibaba, on so many platforms to get visibility and find a global market for it and get a return on that investment at the end of its life. And I really am encouraging people to take advantage of that. You would do it with an automobile, you would do it with a boat, you would do it with excess construction equipment. All of us do it, a piece of jewelry, a watch. And many of us, these clinicians, especially ones on the phone, these are independent business owners and you own those assets and you should find a way to deploy them.
So what's stopping you? I mean,
Um,
yes.
for-
yeah,
what stops me is I don't know if I would say lazy, but as a physician, I'm not business minded. And like you said, Scott, right? If it's a car, a TV, whatever, you would resell that. I, you know, I don't think of it from a business standpoint. And I also feel like, oh, it doesn't have any value. What am I going to get for it? Is it worth the effort? And I'm so busy in my clinical practice that's just, I guess I don't put a lot of attention towards that, you know?
And is there a concern with liability as well?
No, I didn't really think about that. No,
Jeff, what was that? I didn't hear that.
I was asking if there was a concern for liability as well. Maybe getting rid of that piece of equipment, and then what happens if someone else puts it in use and they hurt someone with it? Am I liable? I mean, I'm trying to think of these barriers to why we're all hoarding equipment.
That's absolutely a barrier, and that's one of the things that MRP is working on fixing, is creating these facilities like we have in Park City, where clinicians can sell things amongst themselves, and then we can process it to minimize that liability. That'll start somewhere next year, but I think for the most part, there's not a huge amount of liability in selling many of these assets if the construct of the agreement is corrected properly or for clinicians. And often when you sell things on eBay, you minimize that. And you can sell things by as is, even though it may be working. Allow people to inspect them, but sell the asset as is. But I think the biggest reason is what Dr. Mata said, is that you guys are busy running a practice and you really don't know the steps or what the legality is, or how do you get paid, or do you want somebody coming to your practice to inspect it? There are some real barriers there that are different than a car or a piece of furniture.
I also, just piggybacking on that, I think there is somewhat of a disconnect of what we think the device is, right? We pay this price up front and we know that we're paying for branding, we're paying for the name, or we're paying this outrageous amount of money. And then we come to the point where we have to sell it. And, I know a little bit about cars. So I went to MRP, actually. I went and saw them open up these lasers, see the parts, see what they're stripping, what they're using in these things. Once you see that, you see the back end of it, you realize these devices are a lot more than what we think it is. We think of it as a stationary unit, but these things have hundreds of parts that are worth thousands of dollars. And there is a market. I think we just have to understand it. But yeah, I'm sure the liability, now thinking about it, if I was going to sell a laser not to MRP, I'd be like, I don't know where I'm sending this. Hopefully no one gets hurt. But yeah.
So both of you have worked with MRP with used equipment. I mean, is it become, hey, this is my resource for this type of purchasing? And I mean, can you describe the relationship that you have with MRP a little bit and how logistically it works?
For me, MRP is so trustworthy. I have such a sense of safety. My experience was seamless, and I had bought a used a used device from a fellow colleague, and really wasn't in working order. I just bought it directly, and then it came and shipped. Pieces were missing and whatnot, and so that was a wash. But when I bought from MRP, it was seamless. It was professional. There was transparency, and the best part about it is they're still with me. If I have an issue, I have a whole team that I can call. I mean, I can't imagine, like, I would never purchase another device without talking to Scott first.
Very kind. Thank you. We have a great team.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
you
wouldn't,
do.
I couldn't agree more with that statement. Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off. Do you have,
Oh.
no? Sorry, you were continuing talking. I think I cut you off.
No, I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I opened my practice new, and I went to the reps came to me. I wanted to, get all these lasers, all these devices. And I called Scott as well. And I was introduced to him through a mutual colleague who was also kind of in the same space as me at that time. And I came up with him. I was like, I want this laser, this laser, this laser. I want these. He's like, all right, step back. one, like, what are your goals? What are you trying to get? What are you trying to treat with your patients? You're just telling me brand names. Like, what are the devices you want? And because that's what they sell you on, is these names. And honestly, he took me back and was like, focus on what you want to treat your patients with, get things that are going to really help your practice grow. And then on the back end, because I was also nervous, these are used lasers. Is there any problems with it? There's so many engineers who have worked on these lasers. The team there is incredible. I've had times where like my machine, little things wrong with it. I'm in the room with the patient calling the number on my machine. I'm like, they'll FaceTime me right there and be like, fix this, change that. Perfect. It's running fine. I'm like, this is amazing. Like, you can't get that level of service. So I never have that fear with my devices now.
Scott, and a lot of that is a testament to the armament of parts and pieces you've been able to put together. But I want to circle back to this pricing thing too, because you've been able to do that because maybe physicians, I think some physicians don't get rid of certain lasers, by the way, because it costs them $300 or $400 to take it to the dump. And they don't want to take it to the dump and dump it in the dump. But meanwhile, there may be some parts in there. But if I bought something for $70,000, even if it's 10 years ago, and it's worth $2,000 now, it feels like a hard pill to swallow. So I'm guessing it puts you in a funny position too, Scott, where it's like, you don't want to be the guy that have to say, hey, look, it's 10 years old. Nobody supports that technology anymore. We've moved on from, horse and buggy, and sorry.
Jeff, it's actually worse than that. I had a customer today. I started my early this morning. I started an email exchange with a customer that had bought something recently for $100,000 from a new reseller, and she owes $70,000 on it. And the rep had sold her on, as Dale was talking earlier about the money that's going to be made with that device and how people are going to line up, and basically gold bullion is going to be flying out of the machine, a broken ATM. And no one had told her the truth, that we currently buy those machines for $20,000 to $25,000. We can sell them for 35 to 40 with 6-month warranties, training, shipping, support, all of which costs a mammoth amount of money to provide the infrastructure support that we have. And nobody had told her the truth. And Jeff, I broke her heart. I mean, I just basically broke her heart. And the way I approach this is, no one's told her the truth this entire time, and somebody actually has to tell them the truth. And that's what I said at the very beginning. The most important thing for sellers is to first not get emotional. We all make horrific mistakes in business. And I've been at it a long time, and I still make catastrophic ones almost on a daily basis. And for clinicians that have spent 20 years going to school, or med spas that have spent 10 or 15 years going to school or building their businesses, this is very difficult to accept that you've made $100,000 or $200,000 mistake. So the first thing is become non-emotional, and then realize that that loss is already occurred. There's nothing you can do to get it back. It's already there. And but Jeff, to your point, it is a hard thing to tell people. It's a hard thing to accept. And it isn't a fun part of our job. And we do try to tell people their babies are ugly very lightly and very softly.
Well, and a lot of the questions that we had, of the, I don't know, near 200 registrants, we had 100 pre-questions, and a lot of them were about price. Like, what discount do I need to give you? In other words, if you're reselling, so they're thinking maybe they're paying a percentage of it to you, or what commission would I need to pay on used equipment, or how much do you charge to sell my. So can you speak to that? I want people to walk away here and have a real sense of what it's going to take to sell their equipment, and what you mentioned these huge costs. I know, Scott, I've said these very words to you, to say, if I sell a piece of equipment to somebody, I have to take care of them for 4 or 5 years. What's that worth? To me, at least a few $1,000s a year. So if it's any less than that, I'm not interested in being a part of it.
Well, a couple of tips and tricks. The first thing that you would do is you can go onto eBay. Much of the devices that are out there in the market today are on eBay or will be on eBay, or you can historically search to look at historical sale prices, but recognize that there's a wide range of prices. Sometimes a device that might be worth 20,000 is listed for 30 to 100,000 because people have leases on them and they're trying to see if there's a magical way that they can recover their payoff or what they paid for the system. But eBay is a really good guide to look at, but realize that things don't sell at that price. Almost everything on eBay for a capital asset in healthcare has a make an offer button, and things are selling quite frequently at 25%, 50%, sometimes even less than those listed prices. So that's a good place to start. Currently, we're buyers of equipment. We're only buying things and then we're bringing it here. We don't ship anything direct. And we go through a meticulous process, as Chris mentioned and Dr. Mata mentioned. But in the near future, in the next quarter or two, we're going to open up what we call what's called a side-by-side disruptive managed marketplace. And what that means is we're going to allow sellers on the platform for a very small fee to be able to transact amongst themselves. And we'll provide the support for that on an a la carte basis. If you want us to transport it, we'll do that. If you want us to service it, we can do that. If you want us to certify it, we can do that, depending on what the appetite is or the tolerance is for the buyer and seller. So Dr. Tomasian and Dr. Mata in the future will be able to retain the maximum amount of their purchase price. But in the short term, the best way, and I know this seems counterintuitive, but the best way right now for an individual clinician is to put something on eBay. And if anybody has, tips and tricks they want to know about how to protect yourself from being ripped off on eBay, I'll be happy to answer those offline. You can email me and I'll give you some guidance. But that is the number one place to get the most amount of money for your asset. If you're looking for quick cash, we're going to be the second best place because we'll pay you 100% in advance. But there's a lot of dealers and resellers out there, really good ones that we work with, that other people can work with, they have relationships with, where you can call them and they will pay you 100% in advance before they pick up the asset. But again, you're going to get the least amount of value there because, that's a business asset to us. And it's like if we're buying a new piece of equipment, we have to maintain that relationship. The last thing I'll say is this. There's a very big misconception about online transactions and selling medical equipment. If you buy a consumer good, let's say a watch, for example, or a box of Tide, pretty much at the delivery is when that endpoint is, when it's delivered and the customer accepts delivery. In healthcare, that's where everything starts. Adverse events, ongoing training, uptime, serviceability, parts, warranty costs, service costs, regulatory issues. So we're making, often a 5, 10, 15-year commitment to that customer when we sell something. And that has a mammoth amount of cost associated with it. So we're not going to be the highest buyer of equipment. I think sometimes that's hard for people to realize.
So, yeah, but finding a buyer, you say eBay, in my experience, and this is just talking to the community, go post anything you want on eBay. It doesn't mean it's going to do anything. It may sit there for a very, very long time. The challenge I think we have is none of this equipment is getting newer. None of it is getting more valuable. So, and God forbid, another newer model or newer edition comes out while you're waiting on eBay for someone to want your older model. Now you're 2 older models. So I thought, Scott, actually what you were going to say is the best thing that you could do, and this is my business mind thinking, but is to parlay whatever that is, even if it's $4,000 or $5,000 into your first 4, 5 months worth of payment on something that will actually bring you in revenue that's relevant to you, that you're excited about, that's interesting, because the revenue piece is really, I mean, when we look at the cost of equipment and finance over a 4 or 5 year period, it should not be the variable in your business. And if it is, I mean, you're not bringing in enough revenue. I don't care if it's $10,000 worth of laser payments. I mean, if you can't cover that, a certain amount of payments, you really got to explore revenue now, right? So I would think that the danger of that, and Dale, when you mentioned it in the beginning of this with the, that's why I was interested in what you had to say with that cost of the equipment sitting there. The piece that struck me is taking your mental bandwidth away, being another confusing factor and distraction instead of focusing on core competency. I literally have clutter in my office.
Yeah, I agree. If you're looking at it from a business standpoint, you have assets that are sitting around doing nothing, and it's to your advantage to rationalize those, turn those into assets that are generating revenue. So even if you have to take a loss on those, at least you have that, you have some value that's sitting there doing nothing. And if you can take that and turn it into an asset that's doing something, sell your old assets, buy something new or pre-owned that will generate revenue, you're positive on.
And if you do it now, it's less of a loss, right? Theoretically. And then the loss itself is
Assets only go down in value. So yeah,
right.
The sooner the better.
And I mean, and it's true, unless it's a Rolex or a Ferrari. And even then it has to be a rare edition.
None of
That I would know about Rolexes or Ferraris.
None of these are Rolexes and Ferraris, I promise you that.
Right.
Let's use a practical example. There's a muscle tightening body contouring device. I'm not going to mention any manufacturers or models, but let's assume that price is roughly 200,000 list. And let's say thousands of clinicians around the country have bought that for several $100,000 plus tax and either financed it or leased it in some capacity. Those devices today are trading for under $100,000. I'm guessing within the next 6 months, those devices are going to be $50,000. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The biggest reason is this company continues to come out with new technology and creates a lot of motion around that new technology for people to buy. And so what you have to realize is the stuff that was, brought out a year and a half ago that was $200,000 is no longer what people want when they're going out for the next new thing. So I'm guessing by the beginning of next year, a year from today, that device that is selling for under 100,000 is going to be selling easily for under 50, maybe close to 25,000. So to Dale's point is you've got to look at getting rid of these things as quickly as you possibly can, because they're only going down. The second thing, which I think Dr. Tomasi and Dr. Mata mentioned, is you also have to take advantage of these from a purchasing standpoint, because not just being the sellers of them, but pausing and looking if there's good alternatives out there in the pre-owned market where you could take advantage of this massive amount of inventory that's out there. And I'm not necessarily being self-serving when I say that. There's lots of good resellers. And again, I think you're going to see more and more clinicians trying to recover their capital by selling themselves, because think about it. If we buy that $100,000 asset today that sold for 200,000, we're not paying 100,000, but often a clinician can get the delta between what we might pay and what retail is, because somebody's willing to cowboy it up and take on that responsibility of finding service and support for it themselves, or even pay the illegal, unjust, predatory, unethical recertification fees that are predominant in this space. But to Dale's point, and you got to get rid of this stuff quick because it's not going up.
So, I've always said, just in my own consulting over the last couple of decades, you don't have to be first or second. Maybe you want to be third or fourth or fifth. You don't want to be years down the road. But with these muscle stimulation devices, as you have so mentioned, and from what I'm hearing, they're selling south of, I don't even want to say it, $1.25 new now. So, these things have, so we have these devices that come out at these fantastic prices. They sell the first 200 of them, then they drop the price, they sell another 200 of them or 150 of them, drop the price again, and now it's kind of open to the masses. I'll put this to our two physicians in practice, at what point do you make those decisions? I mean, you want to validate the technology. You don't want to be last. Your customer base doesn't want you to be last. And meanwhile, I guess the question is, can I generate $200,000 between now and next year with this technology? Because if I just wait a year, I can buy it for $200,000 less. What are your thoughts on that?
I've had this thought many times actually, because I've always looked at new devices. I'm like, this is great. It's not in my area. One thing I've been trying to do, and kind of going back on social media, is, I actually survey not only on social media, but my patients. I email my patients or text my patients through my electronic medical records, and actually put out a feeler. Is anyone interested in this device? Or like, my actual patient's going to want to use this. Is it worth my time to bring on now? How much is it going to cost me to promote it? And if it's super early, a lot of people have no idea, right? The consumer doesn't have any idea. If it's really late, a lot of people want the newest thing. So I usually give it about a year. There's like acne lasers right now that are out there, and I've been offered them, and I'm waiting to see how great the results are, maybe 3 more months down the line to get good clinical data. Because the worst thing is you bring a device that really doesn't give you the outcomes you're promising. And in a world now where one review kills you and you're charging thousands of dollars for these things, you want something that's going to work and that you believe in and that you want to promote, because we are selling these procedures to patients.
Dr. Mata?
Yeah, I agree with Chris, and I'll add that, it's very tempting to want to buy a new piece of equipment to bring in another, source of revenue and a new crowd of people, patients, younger generation of patients. And it's very easy to get caught up. And then you have the reps who come in and, they fast sell you on everything. And I think I do what Chris does. I ask my existing clientele, I ask my existing patients, is this something you're going to want to do? And I think about it first, because you're right, they're about $200,000. Is going to take me 8 years to make the money back. And how much you have to say to yourself, okay, how much am I going to charge per treatment? How many patients is it going to take me per month? And how many months am I going to recoup my money? And then, like Chris said, how am I going to advertise this? How am I going to draw in new clients? Do I have enough office staff to kind of help me manage all of this? And I think I've just been in practice so long, and I'm so old that I just don't want to be depleted. I am in a very saturated area. I'm in Beverly Hills, and everyone has everything, and everyone wants the latest and greatest. And I think you have to pause and think about, how will I recoup my money? You can have a $200,000 device sitting there, and you don't want these things for decoration. It's tempting, but I think you just have to think, how am I going to make this money back? And I really like what you said, Jeff. Wait a year and maybe get a used one. Not even a year. I mean, you could probably get a used one in 6 months.
Yeah, yeah, and I like,
Wait a year.
and what Dr. Tomason said too is like, at a year, it's showing that it's either gonna be around for a while,
Right.
or it was a fad, the low-hanging fruit is gone, and that's it. If you're one of those practices that wants to gamble with the low-hanging fruit, and you continue to do it over and over and over again, and you're, I'll use someone in your area, maybe a Grant Stevens type physician, maybe you can afford to do some of that stuff. But if your brand has anything to do with reliable, consistent results, I mean, you're really gambling on research that you don't know about either. So it's really an interesting.
If I want to comment on this, came up interesting with both Chris and Dr. Mata. We're talking about, it's tempting. One of the best ways to protect yourself is to not do something. Time is often your ally. And that's what both of them were saying. And you guys have to realize that most of the reps that are selling these devices have never run an operating company before, don't understand what a balance sheet is, don't understand what a P&L is, don't have any place where people can leave reviews about them. They're highly trained, for lack of a better word, assassins on creating tempting environments. Also, you have to realize that the financing community realizes that clinicians in the US, and I'm not just talking about medical doctors, I'm talking about med spas, virtually have a 0% default rate when it comes to financing. So they realize that there's a 0% default rate. This is especially true of clinicians, by the way, because they can essentially go back to being a clinician and, bill Medicare, Medicaid, Medi-Cal. They can go back into some form of a practice that's billing third-party carriers, and they can make money to pay their debts. Leasing companies and banks know this. Leasing companies also create these really crazy environments where they don't disclose interest rates. They'll tell you the interest rate,
Right.
which is sometimes, 6-7%, but they don't realize that lease contracts, except in 2 states, don't disclose the actual total rate, which is called the stream rate, which is a combination of the rental rate and the interest rate combined, which is often 12 to 25% interest. So they make these very tempting environments to buy this equipment to often unsuspecting clinicians with limited business acumen that are highly trained salespeople that have never run a business before. I just find it's just a whole mess that creates these kind of difficult situations where people get trapped. And I think, to Dr. Mata, your point, and Dr. Tomasian, you really have to slow down. That is your number one asset when it comes to these tempting offers, is because when you really do the financial math and do a legitimate return on investment, when you understand the interest rate, the total interest rate, the marketing cost, the operating cost, the staffing cost, the likelihood of success of a $200,000 device is relatively zero.
Mhm.
And likely unnecessary. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the other piece is, I don't know how much catch up you're doing a year later, if there is, and Scott, we've had the conversation about the prices on these technologies, the bottom's got to drop out. But this is, again, one of those reasons that a $300,000 laser technology that a year and a half later is sold for $100,000 is not, that model will not continue to work.
Let me just totally tangent here for a minute and give some everybody that's listening and in the future when they're watching this. It's interesting when you look at globalization, we're seeing inflation being a rather significant component of cost. We're seeing costs go up. But interestingly, in healthcare, globalization is bringing costs down. The barrier to entry to bringing in, Eastern European, Middle Eastern, Asian devices into the US market, and the barriers with FDA are getting lower and lower. And you're going to see costs coming down in capital medical equipment like we've never seen before, with also much more advanced technology, because much of the great technology is made in these markets and then repurposed in the US under major brands. So the big shift over the next couple of years is radical decrease in the cost of these assets. So you really have to be careful right now in that if you buy something for 100 and 200,000, is there going to be a better technology in 6 to 12 months coming in from an Asian market, because these barriers are coming down that don't exist in other markets?
Dale, you want to comment on that? I know you've seen a lot of manufacturing over your.
Yeah, I think time is your friend in purchasing these things. Trying to jump on the new fad or the latest product is like day trading. I mean, if you're lucky, you make money. And if you're not, you're going to lose a lot of money. There are products that have been out there that are proven. If it's a working product and it has a good application, it'll be around for years. Like CO2 lasers, IPLs, they've been around for 30 years. They're going to be around for at least 10, 20 more years. They're going to generate money for you. Some of these new products, some of them might not. And it's like day trading. You have to really be good at it to catch the fad product early, because they usually have a time span of 2 to 5 years. They might peak in 2 or 3 years. And if you might miss the peak, that's usually dependent upon the company marketing the hell out of it to consumers and driving demand until the consumers are disappointed and then they move on to another product. So if it was me, I'm more conservative. I would stick to technology I know that's been around for a long time and is going to generate money for a long more time.
Add to that CO2 list, CO2, IPL. I feel like Thulium has kind of proven itself in that, in a lot of practices love, you know, even specifically a Fraxel or
Q switch lasers have been around for 30 years. They're going to be around a long time. Hair removal. There's some proven technologies that are here year after year.
yeah, hair removal, i.e. 810 diode, 755 alexandrite, and then of course with the combination 1064, we see a lot of those systems. Other systems you see kind of as staples of practices. I don't see standalone long pulse yags very much anymore, but they were around and I think they still exist in doctors' offices.
I think you're going to see a resurgence of long pulse yags. Again, you're also going to see some some Q switch yags standalone. But Dr. Mata, Jeff mentioned Thulium 1927. You recently purchased one. You've now had it for a little bit of time. What are you seeing out there in the market on that? How's it being adopted and how's it being received?
It's being received very well. I have a variety of lasers in my office, but that is just my go-to. It's safe on all skin types. You can control the amount of resurfacing or treatment you want to do, minimize the downtime. It's a terrific laser. I'm really, really happy with it.
Chris, what are you seeing right now that's being received well in your market in LA?
Not laser, it's more, I mean, RF microneedling has been huge for me. I have a lot of dark skin types who want basically no downtime. I have a CO2 as well. So the CO2, the only problem in California, you know, we have a lot of sun here. So I have to be picky with my CO2 patients, but RF microneedling I think has been huge. An easy sell to patients. The results are great. And my microneedling radio frequency is monopolar and bipolar, so the pain is much better than the traditional one that's very well known out there. So that one I think is probably my top seller in my office, at least.
When we're going to sell equipment, I want to just give some advice to some of these listeners that have, you can see on the chat, there were a couple of specific things which I'll let you address, but I know, so somebody has this piece of equipment, they get the impetus, hopefully from tonight's conversation, to do something about it, to move the piece of equipment. There's some basics that I know, Scott, you're gonna need, or your team's gonna need, but if they send an email off, or you're going to need the device, the model, the year, or maybe hopefully a picture of the plate, the serial plate behind the laser. Do you want to see a video? Do you need some sense of usage? Do you not need all that to start with? I mean, how do I get started? Because I know from when I was more involved in that part of our industry, sometimes someone would call me and say, hey, I have a V-beam I want to sell. Whoa, is it 95? Is it a perfecta? Is it what is it?
Well, to something people don't realize about pre-owned equipment, and this matters a lot to sellers of pre-owned equipment, to understand the difference between new and used. And very few people understand this, but so let me try to explain as simply as I can, is that used devices, and this isn't limited to medical equipment, but we'll keep it to medical equipment. You make your money, let me rephrase it. People don't buy unknown brands. They buy top tier brands. So if you want to maximize the return on your investment beyond the use of as a tool in your practice, you need to stick to big brands. And the dynamic behind that is that's what sales reps are out there selling. And so that's what customers know. And that's what manufacturers are out there promoting socially and otherwise through traditional media. And so no one calls us up for second and third tier devices. They never call us up. So we don't buy those. We only buy top tier gear. So what are we buying? We're buying Cyton, InMode, BTL, Cynosure, Candela, Luminous, Lutronic. We're buying the things that people will call us up to buy. No one ever calls us up and asks for that second or third tier brand. And so you got to keep that in mind when you're looking to purchase something or going to sell it. So if you have a second or third tier brand, and I'll use an example, and I don't necessarily mean to upset anyone when I say this, but if you bought a Polygon, it's pretty much unsellable. Polygon has been acquired by Luminous. Nobody really knows what it is. It's almost impossible to get rid of it. I often see those selling at auction at various places as low as a few $1,000s. And then you add the barriers of getting consumables if you didn't buy it new. So there's a lot of things out there you're going to really struggle to get rid of. But again, that goes back to Dale's point. Even if you can get a couple $1,000s, it's time to get rid of it, move on, put that $2,000 into something that can build brand or build some exposure or build some success in the practice. But stick to big brands. That's going to be your best bet.
And I guess what a smart thing to think about when we are talking about taking time and buying pre-owned equipment, or at least looking at pre-owned equipment to begin with, the sticker shock from buying a pre-owned piece of equipment to 3 years later giving up that pre-owned piece of equipment. It's the spread on it isn't nearly what it would have been retail buying from a manufacturer and then having to sell that third party to you, Scott, to then pick up whatever the newest thing is later. So maybe it's good incentive to buy those brands.
Let me share something with everybody, including Chris and Dr. Mata, that may not know this. Let's say a device is 200,000. We're talking about that same device at 200,000 because you said something, Jeff, that was really interesting. It was really subtle what you said about what they're selling for now. You guys need to understand, everybody listening now and in the future, there's this thing called variable pricing. So the list price is 200,000. What Dr. Mata and Dr. Tomasi may not know is 20% of you guys will pay list price. 20% will pay the asking price. And then the rep says, well, if the clinician says, well, I'm not going to pay that, they go down to 180,000. And 20% of you pay 180,000. And then if somebody said, hey, I don't want that, the rep drops to 160,000, and 120 or 20% pay 160,000. And then when that clinician says, I'm not going to pay 160, they drop again to 140. This goes all the way down. And Jeff, you used a number. You said you're selling for 120,000. The delta, the difference between that 200 and the 120 is what they call the average selling price of the ASP, is what the number is they traditionally sell for. The reps are incentivized in their commission plans to typically get the highest price, and they get the lowest commission at the floor price, which is that 120. So this is what, when somebody calls us and we said, hey, we're going to pay much lower than the floor price for that asset, even if it's only 6 months old, you have a large portion of the customer base, the majority that paid 140, 160, 180, and 200. You're shaking your head, Chris. Am I?
No, it's shocking to me because, they convince you so much that that's the final price, and that they have so much wiggle room on these things. It's just.
Yeah. I mean, there's no transparency whatsoever. And it's just quite sad that the office 2 miles down the road paid half the price that you did. And, they make it I can only offer this to you for 24 hours. So you have 24 hours to make up your mind. I'm really giving you a great deal. And, I've realized over time, reps are not your friends. This is purely a business transaction. And it's a hard, they really do try to sell you. And you have to realize that there is no transparency whatsoever.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just saying, just to piggyback on this, the reps actually don't like you, and you should know this. I had a rep send me a meme of a thinking versus executing thing to my phone when I didn't give them a price in 24 hours. So they don't really, all they want is their commission. So they'll make it seem like they're selling you just a open ATM. Just be careful.
I can't dismiss, I've seen all the worst behavior. I've seen some great behavior as well, but few and far between. And I've certainly seen a lot of the worst behavior. Proof in point, telling a physician how stupid they are when they don't make a decision
Yeah.
doesn't give you a sense that that person's going to be in our industry very long. I have a feeling, Chris, you're going to be in our industry a lot longer than that rep is gonna be in our industry. But not, hey, why did you make that decision, or what could I have done differently? But hey, you're
Yeah.
and as Scott was talking about this variable pricing, as the pricing continues to drop, what is the trade-off they're giving you? Urgency. Do it
Yeah.
now.
I would never, don't fall for those time limit pressures, because these assets only go down in value. They never go up in value. So there's really no hurry to purchase anything on the market.
No, guys, last time I checked, there's never once been a hair removal emergency. Not once.
And I've seen the urgency is definitely is definitely a sales tactic. Another one is sorry, I'm blanking on the word, but not having a lot of it.
Well, not having inventory.
No, well, yeah, but not having, having some exclusive on it. Like if you get in now, there's not going to be as much supply available. So if you get in early, you're going to get the benefit of all the XYZ. And then, but what happens is, as Dr. Thomison said to start with, then the neighbor gets it, and then someone else gets it. And then as someone posted on their chat, then the newer version comes out, and all of a sudden, all the marketing dollars for the old version stop, even though you're only a couple of months into it. So I think for all these reasons, but Scott, I got to tell you, before MRP, before you started inventorying parts and being able to give some of the assurances to the market, and I know you see this as a continuation, you see this as a boilerplate almost of what's happened in every other industry. And you can kind of look at the commerce aspect of this and say, of course, this is going to happen in our industry as well. But until parts get inventory and service manuals become available and training, and I'm getting the brochures that I need to market, and I'm still getting you to come install, and all these pieces that were so relevant to us, I didn't have assurance of pre MRP. And some of these great third-party companies that you speak of maybe weren't so great back then, or didn't have the part availability. And I know you're even working with some of them supplying parts.
Yeah, I think if we want to leave this on a positive note, Jeff, you have to realize before, before Uber, how do I want to say this, is we're in the days where Amazon was being, thought about and being built when Walmart dominated the landscape. We're at the place where Uber was being thought about when taxis dominated the landscape. And we're at this unique pivot point where almost like we're in this back to the future moment where we can go back 20 years and, because healthcare operates medievally, we can kind of go back 20 years and kind of look at what's about to happen. And what's about to happen is that 25 to 50% of the costs of selling medical equipment, supplies, pharma, med surg are going to get wiped out because of really expensive and inefficient sales processes. And all of those dollars are going to go to more profit to clinicians, lower cost, greater access, higher quality healthcare. This is happening regardless. And the big benefit is that ties to this topic is that clinicians are going to be able very soon, within the next year, not just on our platform, but other ecosystems, they're going to be able to sell their tables, their lights, their other equipment. They're going to sell potentially excess consumables and get almost retail for these assets with minimal fees. as you do with all kinds of things. Think about how difficult it was 10 years ago to sell a concert ticket. And just think about today, how efficient it is to get often what you paid, if not more, for that concert ticket because of the efficiency of side-by-side disruptive marketplaces. So this is happening very, very quickly. And I think the watchers and the listeners are going to see this happen where they're, even though I don't think their equipment's going to go up in value, I think future equipment that they buy, if they're much smarter about the purchasing, are going to be able to retain the majority of their equity themselves and not give it to a third party like us.
And acquisition costs are going to be lower. So I agree. Your insight is always so valuable, I think, from a 10,000-foot view. From a really close view, just to leave everyone, Scott, if it's not brand equipment, MRP likely doesn't want it, or not what we call top tier equipment. But for those people who you may not want their stuff, what should they do with it? For those people that you want it, what do you need? How do they get in touch with you? Is there a form they can fill out?
My banker came in our warehouse one day and said, Scott, is there anything you won't buy? So I'll buy anything. There's nothing that I won't buy. Well, it doesn't matter. Even Jeff, if it's an off brand, we just won't pay that much for it. There are homes for everything. A lot of the parts in these systems are they're made by OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, not the manufacturers themselves. So there's a lot of utility in the parts value of a lot of these systems, as Chris mentioned earlier. So there's no limit. But again, your best bet if you're trying to maximize value is, and again, this seems a little bit contrarian because I'm telling you to go to a competitor of ours, which is eBay, but we do sell on eBay, is to start out there. And but if you want quick cash and you want to get rid of it, and you don't want the stress, as Dr. Mata was mentioning, some of the barriers that she faced or would face selling it, is simply call us up and we'll monetize it for you, any amount of money. But there's lots of dealers. There's really good used dealers out there. And you can Google them, look at their reputation. There's some strong players out there. I work with a lot of them that will prepay you 100%. By the way, always get prepaid 100% in advance by a wire transfer without exception. Always, without exception. Never sell anything by a cashier's check. Never sell anything 50-50 or 80-20. Get paid. Always get paid.
Great advice. Dr. Mata, Dr. Kristen Eisen, thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Coop, appreciate your insight as always. On behalf of the Business of Studies community, I would go with Scott's recommendations. I would say if you are looking to parlay any of that technology into something new, whether that's new for the practice or just new technology, then it probably really makes sense to reach out to Scott, to not make a mistake on the other side that costs more dollars than maybe you not getting what you anticipated on an unused piece of technology in your practice. But for our physician panelists, I think it was just really terrific insight that you offered when to move on from technology. I love the kind of that concept of not falling in love or having too much pride and being able to pivot, like every entrepreneur should be able to pivot, make changes, move on, and do well. So Dr. Chris, any last words to kind of give everyone a last word chance? And
give MRP a call if you need a new laser, honestly. I'll be on, I'll plug them because I will say, I mean, this market is it's complicated. It's a lot, but I think there's a beauty of, it's very refreshing when you have full transparency when purchasing something at this amount of money. These things are not cheap, and you want to feel safe using it. You want to feel comfortable using it. You want to be trained well on it. All these things are super important. And at the end of the day, you're selling these to people and you're using them on people. So you really want to be confident with the machines you get, and you want to be happy that it's at your office and not feel like you're looking at just a piece of debt that you're paying off.
Hey, Chris, where can people follow you? Where can other clinicians follow you on TikTok and Instagram? What's
my name? It's just my name, Dr. Tomasian. Very easy.
Dr. Mata, you're Beverly Hills. How do people find you?
On Instagram, I'm on Instagram at Dr._Mod, or just my name, drmod.com. Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, Jeff, as always, thank you for everything you're doing to the community, continuing to do webinars and posts and education. A lot of what's happening in the world right now, changing what's happening in aesthetics is because of the work you're doing, and we're all super grateful for the connectivity you're creating.
Well, thank you. Thank you for supporting it and being a part of it and feeding us with great, transparent content. We can all rise together. So on behalf of the Business of Aesthetics community, thank you so much. I know we went over tonight, which I seldom do, but I seem to do it when I get these great panelists on with so many quality things to say. We appreciate you all very much. This will be available if you go to businessaesthetics.org. You can download this. You can share it with your friends. If you have any other questions, MRP is mrp.io, mrp.io, and you can go there and get in touch with them that way. That would be my recommendation for the 100 or so people that have equipment. Yeah, it sounds great. Get on eBay, do all this stuff. If you haven't done it for the last 6 months, my guess is you're not going to do it. Just get on the phone with Scott and take what it is and know that they're going to be fair with you and get it done and move on and unclutter your mind. So thank you all. Enjoy your evening. Appreciate it.